Nyan Jembor Sordan Hingme Jang, Zoner Molom Jembor, Ngagata, Bakar Targam Santo, Sherman, Stumbati Jejan Lagi Sham Sar, the Chenro Sergi Jenkins, Jawar Tiji and the Yellar. Jimmy Panzo Jala Soran, the Condia Topan Por Shinji Lo.
The supreme, profound, and wondrous Dharma is difficult to encounter even in millions of eons. Now that we have the chance to hear and receive it, may we realize the Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings, please give rise to the Supreme Bodhicitta. Let's continue our study of the Udāna Sutra. Regarding the Udāna Sutra, we are currently studying the 14th chapter, which is the chapter on hatred. Every time during the teachings in class, your concentration is quite commendable. I hope you all continue to make an effort as always. The recitations before and after class are also very meaningful. As you all know, for my own part, apart from a very few specific recitations like Soul Air of the Doctrine Tantra and a few other specific ones, much of what we chant before and after class makes up my daily recitation practice. So this is very meaningful as long as you feel in your heart that every day we can have such excellent opportunities to practice. Including our practice of Guru Yoga, we should cherish this deeply. In the Treasury of Precious Qualities by Jigme Lingpa in the 5th chapter, it is said that practicing Guru Yoga actually perfects the two accumulations. When we recite the 7-branch offering or the prayer to the Guru beforehand, these constitute the accumulation of merit. Finally, when we visualize the Guru's wisdom and our own mind merging inseparably, this is the accumulation of wisdom. This is what Jigme Lingpa explained. Therefore, when we practice Guru Yoga, we are also perfecting the two accumulations. Similarly, these other recitations are also very important. So I think by following this kind of practice taught by Jigme Lingpa, we are perfecting the accumulations of merit and wisdom every day. Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities is actually extremely important and holds great blessings for many of us who practice Vajrayana. In fact, this Treasury of Precious Qualities, as those of you here should know, serves as a further commentary on Longchenpa's Finding Comfort and Ease in the Nature of Mind. Because in Finding Comfort and Ease in the Nature of Mind, the earlier sections cover topics like the rarity of human existence, impermanence, karma, the sufferings of samsara, and relying on a spiritual friend. After that, the 6th chapter is on taking refuge. The 7th chapter is on the 4 immeasurables. The 8th chapter is on generating bodhicitta. The subsequent chapters belong to the Vajrayana teachings. The Treasury of Precious Qualities is also structured like this. It's only when the Treasury of Precious Qualities reaches the 5th chapter that it discusses the 4 great wheels. And within the 4 great wheels, it focuses heavily on relying on a spiritual friend. Most of the scriptural quotes found here were quoted by Patrul Rinpoche in the words of my perfect teacher. A considerable portion was quoted from there. The other chapters follow a similar pattern. The content corresponds chapter by chapter. Although we may not have taught it much at our academy in the past, the great masters of the past placed great emphasis on Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities. I also hope that in the future those of you here will have the opportunity to study the Treasury of Precious Qualities. Within it, Jigme Lingpa drew upon his own wisdom to articulate many profound principles that our daily practice needs, principles that you simply won't find in other pith instructions, sutras, or tantras. He expressed them in an accessible pith instruction style. So what I primarily wanted to share with you just now is that our recitations before and after class are also incredibly important. Everyone should practice them well. I was also thinking perhaps after our oral examinations we should all do full prostrations together for 5 minutes. We used to do this in the past. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. During this practice, everyone can visualize Guru Rinpoche because we usually have the group discussion sessions called Blooming Everywhere. Before the group discussion sessions, we will indicate when it's time to start, saying it's time for the Blooming Everywhere to begin, and before that, the Sangha will gather and prostrate in the assembly hall. because we have many sacred objects of the three jewels here. If such supports are not present, you can visualize Guru Rinpoche in front of you. If the visualization is too complicated and you don't understand it, that's okay. Just visualize Guru Rinpoche. Let's try it out today and tomorrow. If everyone is too tired and it doesn't work out, it's no big deal. We can discuss it. But if I can do it, I'm sure you will have no problem. We'll give it a try. Please don't feel that it's too much of a hardship to add another 5 minutes. Don't think like that. Let's see how it goes. Accumulating virtue happens bit by bit. Making good use of our time is very important. Next, we will continue our study. What are we discussing? You who are without wisdom, arguing merely with verbal arguments, ignorant of the meaning of all dharmas, I shall diligently practice this. The main point here is that earlier we discussed how the wise, through their own analysis, come to understand the principles of the Buddha's teachings. Why don't we put into practice these teachings given by the wise masters of the past? In contrast, those who often harbor hatred in their mind stream are actually people without wisdom, the unwise. So what are the unwise like? Arguing merely with verbal arguments. They have no real qualities in their own minds. They just engage in empty verbal arguments and disputes, constantly speaking of right and wrong and stirring up disputes. Is there a typo there? I'll check it later. Ignorant of the meaning of all dharmas. They simply cannot comprehend the meaning of all the dharmas spoken by our teacher, the Buddha. Because the meaning of the teachings given by our teacher is actually meant primarily to counteract afflictions like attachment and hatred. They know absolutely nothing of these principles and merely rely on verbal argument. All right, let's just interpret it this way for now. Could it have meant something else back then? But currently, based on our understanding, if we find a different meaning tomorrow, we'll talk about it then. What this means is that those without wisdom merely rely on a few words to argue or try to harm other sentient beings, including attacking others or frequently ignoring the truth. If a person acts like this, it's certain they cannot understand the true meaning of the Dharma. Why do they fail to understand the true meaning of the Dharma? Actually, this mainly has to do with whether they have relied on a qualified guru or teacher. Many of us today wonder why we cannot truly understand the teachings. The main reason is that we lack a good environment, good conditions, and the opportunity to rely on a qualified spiritual friend. Actually, if one relies on a qualified spiritual friend, basically everyone has the opportunity to master the profound teachings of the Buddha. This truly requires merit as well. If each of us from a young age had such an environment, such conditions, and a truly excellent spiritual friend, then understanding the teachings of all dharmas should not be a problem at all. Therefore, I shall diligently practice this. Our teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and spiritual friends, all urge everyone to realize this meaning and to practice diligently. Regarding the principles mentioned above, if you don't genuinely practice them with diligence yourself, it would be a great pity. The Avatamsaka Sutra also says, those without wisdom and without merit, meaning if one lacks wisdom and merit, even if they arrive at the place of the treasure trove, they will not know it, will not see it, and will gain no benefit from it. They will not understand it for themselves. Even with such favorable conditions, they do not go and see it and ultimately gain no benefit. This was true in the past as well. When His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche was still alive, many people came here. Among those who came, some sought the Dharma day and night. When it came time to leave, they had gained genuine confidence in the true Dharma. However, there were others who lacked proper mindfulness and awareness. Even though they stayed in the sacred land of Larung just the same, when they eventually left, they took nothing meaningful away with them. There could be two people. One might return fully enriched, while the other returns empty-handed, having gained nothing. This is entirely possible. Therefore, for each one of us, our own conditions and merit do make a certain difference. No matter what, people with merit will encounter good people in this life. People without merit will never encounter good people in their entire life. This is very important. So, as we mentioned before, when the Buddha was speaking to Ananda, Ananda said that half of the Buddhist path depends on a spiritual friend. The Buddha corrected him, saying, "You are wrong. The whole Buddhist path relies on a spiritual friend." This point is indeed true. Indeed, in our real life, even for students in the secular world today, like around us here, there are all kinds of prestigious schools and universities. In these universities, some teachers are quite capable, while others fall far short. But those without merit often end up in the classes of the less capable teachers. As a result, when they graduate, they end up having learned almost nothing, possessing no real knowledge at all, and whatever little they have only draws criticism and disapproval from others. So I think each of us should see for ourselves. Whether one can understand the meaning of the Dharma does depend to some extent on personal effort, but more importantly, it's probably each person's own merit. The power of merit is still very important.
Dalam kepa kanyam ba te dak sham ki tsuk je dagla khazir dagla she dag pam bar she pa ji dagpam she pa wo ji de kan sem lan zin she pa de yin kun jim yer.
It says here, "Who among them is truly wise? One who, through words of harmony, can bring disputes to an end. They insulted me, they humiliated me, they defeated me, they harmed me." For those who harbor such thoughts, hatred can never be appeased. What is the main point here? The main message here is that much of the hatred and conflict we experience in this world can actually be reconciled. As mentioned yesterday, even in cases of murder or arson or very serious conflicts and hatred, there are times when they can ultimately be appeased. But some are very difficult. So here, certain hatred can be resolved, while others are very hard to resolve. Then who can put an end to hatred? Who among them is truly wise? One who through words of harmony can bring disputes to an end. In this process, who are the people who can play the role of bringing disputes to an end? Take, for example, noble beings such as Shariputra, Maudgalyayana, and the monk Assaji. These people genuinely possess qualities and realization within their mind streams. Therefore, their words naturally carry weight. Whatever they say can actually appease conflicts, because through their practice or teachings, the words they use to communicate between people carry a special power. Even if there seems to be a conflict between people, a very serious contradiction or dispute actually, by relying on their blessed words, it can be completely resolved. It is entirely possible. Then there are other cases where words simply cannot resolve the issue. What kind of cases are those? If the other person uses harsh words and you start thinking about how someone insulted you at some time and in some place, this is something many people, especially ordinary beings, care deeply about, or thinking they humiliated me, treating me like a servant or some lowly nobody, insulting me in public, or they looked down on me in some way and defeated me, leaving me utterly defeated, or my reputation and various aspects of my life have been damaged, they have ruined everything I have, and so on. If we constantly hold on to these things in our hearts, these so-called emotional knots, unable to let them melt away, thinking this person is out to harm us, then the resentment will be very difficult to put to rest. For instance, in some cases we might think, this person is harming me now, harmed me in the past, and will harm me in the future. Or, this person is harming my friends now, harmed them in the past, and will harm them in the future. Or, they are helping my enemies now, helped them in the past, and will help them in the future. These are what we learn about in Mahayana Buddhism as the 9 kinds of hatred. Most people either focus on what was done to themselves, what was done to their loved ones, or what was done to those they consider their enemies. There are these 9 situations that they just cannot resolve in their minds. This phenomenon is actually very common. If this is the case, then this hatred is very difficult to appease. The main reason it cannot be resolved is actually ongoing disputes, because they will start arguing and fighting with each other. The main reason for this kind of conflict, as the commentaries also explain, is that they haven't truly listened to the Dharma in the first place. Without genuinely listening to the Dharma, they cannot understand the meaning of the true teachings. Without understanding the meaning of the teachings, their minds cannot become disciplined and manageable. As a result, many arguments between people simply cannot be resolved. In the past, the monks from Kosambi and Vaishali had a conflict. The monks from Kosambi originally lived there and held their own views and perspectives. Then the monks who came from Vaishali held on to their own different views. They each stuck to their own opinions and couldn't reach a consensus. This went unresolved for 12 long years. Later, the Buddha reprimanded them and gave them teachings, and finally they reconciled. Actually, things like this happening in the Buddhist community existed even when the Buddha was alive, let alone today. Nowadays, Buddhist communities are relatively better in this regard because they teach the 4 virtuous practices of a monastic. Those who practice the 4 virtuous practices of a monastic should be doing slightly better in this regard. As for others, just as we discussed a couple of days ago, for example, conflicts between different religions or conflicts and hatred between people, in these situations, they constantly hold on to these grudges in their hearts. There are many such examples in the world. For instance, the conflict between India and Pakistan involves such a long history of resentment. Between China and Japan, it has been 50 or 60 years now, and there was resentment even before that. Perhaps there was even more resentment in past lives, which has never been resolved, including others like the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And in this world, there is also much resentment between different countries that simply cannot be appeased. It has always been like this. So between people, for example, between one family and another, there might be resentment because they have killed one another's kin or stolen from each other and so on. But as practitioners, especially monastics, I think the situation now is quite good. Like here at our academy, relying on the vast compassion of His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, even though thousands of monastics live together here, many of the managers here say that if 2 people stop speaking to each other and remain unreconciled even for a single night, they will not be allowed to stay long at the academy. There is this requirement. But ultimately, almost all conflicts or contradictions are resolved very quickly. This is something very rare and precious, because in other small Dharma centers or small communities, even between just 2 people, there's often comparison, competition, and jealousy, and various kinds of conflicts can arise from that. So the main point here is that in secular society, whether it's between groups or individuals, mutual resentment is quite common. It is caused by afflictive emotions, and the root of these afflictions is self-grasping, as it says here. This person scolded me, this person insulted me. In competing with this person, I was defeated. I was harshly reprimanded by them, or my reputation was damaged. Because of these and similar reasons, they cannot let go of the resentment in their hearts. However, if we truly understand the Mahayana Buddhist teaching of selflessness, or we understand how deeply sentient beings suffer, or understand the principle of great compassion and bodhicitta, we would likely not harbor such intense hatred. Actually, for lay people and for worldly people, holding resentment is quite common, especially in the West. There is often an expectation that one should fight back. If one does not fight back, one may be seen as weak, powerless, and lacking backbone. Such a person may be thought unable to develop a strong will. So, according to their values, the fiercer and more aggressive a person is, the more easily they can establish themselves in this world. Otherwise, they may often be bullied and humiliated by others, and may eventually find it hard to hold their head high. There is this kind of view. Of course, from their perspective and standpoint, it's not entirely unreasonable. Worldly people do indeed need this kind of strength, courage, or perseverance. It is perhaps necessary, but as Mahayana Buddhists, we do not need to rely on that kind of approach to stand firm. Therefore, in our daily speech, we should avoid using particularly harsh words. As was just mentioned, gentle words can put an end to disputes. Gentle words refer to very soft and kind language. As a proverb says, some words may seem very harmonious on the surface, but in fact they may be quite sharp. Conversely, speaking harsh harsh words will not necessarily bring any benefit either. For example, the essential collection of all Dharma's Sūtra says harsh words are like a fierce flame, burning all sentient beings. These harsh words are like a fierce flame that burns sentient beings. But when they burn sentient beings in this way, just as we discussed yesterday, while this flame might initially burn others, it will eventually turn back and burn yourself. So even if it doesn't burn you in this life, in the next life you will experience the suffering of burning in the hell realms. Therefore, it is excellent to stop disputes with gentle words. I have also been thinking about these disputes nowadays. In the future, they may take on many rather unusual forms. For instance, with the rise of AI, all sorts of things can happen. I believe it was last month Lingyin Temple in Hangzhou held an ordination ceremony. Afterwards, some people deliberately smeared the temple. They produced over 1,300 different AI-generated videos. They spread rumors that Japanese spies had infiltrated Lingyin Temple disguised as monks and set up military radio stations there. They spread all kinds of rumors and accusations. At the time, there were around 180,000 comments saying the temple should be destroyed, accusing them of this and that. Then, probably around April 15th or sometime around then, the temple officially issued a statement clarifying the matter. They stated that the registration information for all 273 of their monks was perfectly clear and accurate, and there were no outsiders at all. At that point, the rumors collapsed on their own. However, in today's information age, especially when it comes to smearing religion, there is almost no cost and often no accountability. Consider this: if it happened to someone else, if their reputation were smeared by such a campaign across the world, then legally the perpetrators should be held responsible and face punishment. But later, these people just quietly disappeared. Actually, in this day and age, when you see such insults or defamation directed at religion, monastics, or specific individuals, it's hard to imagine, but there's nothing you can do. Perhaps those with good practice can bear it with patience, while others may simply have to endure it in silence. Aside from that, there might really be no other way. This is simply the environment we are in today. If Buddhism were flourishing, and the power of virtue and Dharma was flourishing on all sides, perhaps those people wouldn't even have the chance to spread gossip and stir up trouble. That may be the case. So, in the world, there are indeed all kinds of disputes. In the future, some may be resolved while others may not be. We should be mentally prepared in every aspect. And especially in this particular era, such situations are bound to happen. Next comes the verse that presents the opposite. They insulted me, humiliated me, defeated me, harmed me. If one does not harbor such thoughts, resentment will naturally vanish. This is somewhat the opposite of the previous verse. If someone often scolds me, often insults me, defeats me, or harms me, just like mentioned earlier, even if these situations occur, if you do not hold on to these thoughts and choose not to hold a grudge, then the resentment will naturally disappear very quickly. So it is also mentioned here that if we are true practitioners, whether Mahayana practitioners or followers of the Hinayana, practicing the four virtuous practices of a monastic, we will focus on our practice and not take such things to heart. This is probably the key point. I'd like to think that monastics might handle this a bit better. Otherwise, if one becomes angry over the slightest comment, that is really not very good. Yesterday, when I was mediating some minor disputes among peers, I told them, can you try to restrain yourselves a little bit? Can you press the pause button on your emotions for a moment? Don't let every tiny little thing make you gasp in anger and change your expression. That's really not good. As ordinary people, we all have our own personalities. Some might have stronger anger, while others might have stronger jealousy. Everyone has their own specific habitual flaws. For some, their temper is quite volatile. They get angry immediately over the slightest thing. But for others, wholesome qualities such as faith and compassion arise very quickly in them. Meanwhile, anger, greed, and various afflictions find it very hard to take root in their minds. Their minds are naturally peaceful and gentle, making it easy to cultivate virtue and tame their mind stream. So for such people, this is mainly distinguishing them based on their wholesome qualities. In that case, they wouldn't keep saying things like, "You once said this to me," "You once scolded me," picking up past grievances one by one. That is rather meaningless. It would be better to spend that time on something more meaningful. For example, some people, no matter what slander or scolding they face, regard them as minor matters not worth mentioning. I won't listen to any of this. Even when others say something quite serious, they remain completely unbothered. But then there are some people whom no one has said anything to at all. Yet they go out of their way to pick out faults where there are none. They demand an explanation, insisting on having everything spelled out. Especially when studying Mahayana Buddhism, theoretically speaking, there is really no need to go looking for the causes of every perceived fault, especially those concerning yourself. Like, "You once said this or that to me," or "When I was walking you came over and your attitude seemed a bit off, and you even gave me a hard glare. Why did you do that?" Or "When I was putting on my shoes, you stepped on my foot. Why did you do that?" Or "When I was eating, it seemed like you looked at me with dissatisfaction. Why is that?" And so on. There are many people like this. Sometimes no one has provoked them at all, yet they themselves go looking for problems where there aren't any. There are also some people who are genuinely provoked and have trouble caused for them. That happens too. In fact, provoking others also tends to bring quite a bit of trouble. Let's move on to the next passage. It goes like this. Hatred never ceases through hatred. It is pacified through patience. This is the nature of the Dharma. There was once a woman who appeared to be possessed by a yaksha. This woman constantly harbored resentment in her heart. The yaksha told her, "If you let go of this resentment, I will leave you alone. I won't do anything to you." But the woman simply wouldn't let go of the resentment in her heart. Later, when the Buddha learned of this, he admonished her. The Buddha also stepped in, and in the end the yaksha too was tamed. In fact, there is a natural principle at work in this world. What is this principle? Those who harbor great resentment and slander others will often end up suffering a great deal of slander themselves. So the text says that if we respond to resentment with resentment, it will be very difficult to bring it to an end. For example, trying to clean away dirt with more dirt is simply impossible. Trying to dispel darkness with more darkness is also completely impossible. It only adds fuel to the fire of resentment, making it grow stronger and stronger and making you more and more hateful. This is true between countries as well, as a purely illustrative example, not a political judgment. People who harbor deep resentment consider that when Donald Trump visited China, he reportedly had over 1,000 security personnel. Just think about it. Perhaps it is because, regardless of how powerful one may be, such a person must have many enemies. Otherwise, why would 1,000 people be needed to protect him? Why would it come to that? On one hand, they may indeed be remarkable individuals, but on the other hand, the many things one does also give rise to various kinds of enemy. This is simply how the world is. It was like this in the past, and it is so today. People have been assassinated, slandered. All sorts of people, once they had attained a certain prestige and a certain degree of power, have faced this as well. So if one relies on resentment and keeps holding on to it, even with a massive army or vast quantities of weapons, it is still very difficult to truly protect oneself this way. Just as in the story of Ben Gungyal, that kind of protection is very hard to achieve. If you appease resentment with patience, when others harm you in this way, you cultivate patience. Also, as the commentaries mention, using wholesome states such as loving kindness and compassion. If you apply these as an antidote, then this resentment will be completely eradicated in a very short time. Just as when sunlight appears, darkness naturally vanishes before it. Darkness naturally disappears. What is this? This is the nature of the Dharma. It is an eternal principle. It is a universal law of all phenomena. It is simply their nature. If a person truly wishes to benefit sentient beings, then no matter what happens in this life or the next, they will attain true benefit. Some people might practice virtue in this life. To illustrate this point, there was a fellow from my home region. He had been quite wayward in the past, doing things like killing and stealing cattle, but in recent years he stopped killing and stopped drinking. He was doing reasonably well, but many things still didn't go smoothly for him. He would often console himself, saying, "It's fine, I've done a lot of good deeds these past few years. Things will get better soon. Things will get better soon." Several years ago, he would often say, "I am doing good deeds now. I am a kind person, so there shouldn't be any problems. My fortune will turn very soon," but it still hasn't changed. I heard that just a few days ago he cut down some cypress trees and was arrested. It reminded me that things still haven't gotten better for him. Perhaps karmic causes from past lives are still ripening. So when we do good deeds, the results can sometimes be connected to our past lives. He felt things were about to get better. My fate is about to change. It's about to change because I do so many good deeds every day. For some people, indeed, there are exceptional cases. But coming back to the topic of resentment, generally speaking, the commentaries say that in the higher realms, the form realm, there is no resentment. Below the heaven of the 33, however, it does exist. The devas also wage war against the asuras and so on, not to mention the human realm. I feel that in our world today, many of the elderly leaders of different countries seem to carry a great deal of resentment in their hearts. They try all sorts of methods, and because of this, many innocent civilians are killed and lose their lives. It is deeply heartbreaking. If only the resentment among those in power could be appeased and their hatred lessened even a little, there would actually be enough resources in this world for every being to enjoy their share of happiness. But human beings are often just like this. Therefore, this kind of hatred is very difficult to resolve through conflict. The Madhyama Agama also states, if one tries to end conflict with conflict, it will never truly cease. If one uses dispute to put an end to dispute, that can never be accomplished. Only patience can end conflict. This dharma is truly noble. So this practice of patience is very precious. This dharma is truly noble. Patience is indeed something of immense value, especially for those of us who wear the monastic robes. If we lose our temper at the slightest provocation, that is truly not good at all. There's a saying, once you lose your temper, you have already become the bad person in the situation. No matter what the circumstances, if you are prone to anger, that itself is already a fault. There is no real justification for it. Of course, ordinary people will always find reasons. Why did I lose my temper? Because this person treated me unfairly. They come up with all sorts of justifications, but in fact, as long as anger has arisen in one's mind, there is no valid justification. Even if you say it's for the 3 jewels or for the common good, sometimes some of our stewards and those in positions of responsibility are quick to lose their temper, thinking it's for the sake of training others or for spreading the Dharma and benefiting sentient beings. In such situations, it is best if anger does not arise at all. Look at Atisha. His enlightened activities were so vast, yet he was always very peaceful. So bear this in mind when spreading the Dharma and benefiting sentient beings. It is best not to give rise to anger. Not losing one's temper, I think that is truly admirable. However, when faced with certain situations, it can still be difficult to restrain oneself. Next, it says, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Hatred harms body and mind. The wise should not harbor hatred, because responding to hatred with hatred can never appease hatred. Only the absence of hatred in the heart can end this cycle. Because hatred is like a poisonous snake, it simply cannot be appeased. What is the greatest harm caused by hatred? First, it can harm our own minds. We become depressed, deeply unbalanced, and even struggle to sleep at night. We keep thinking about a particular event over and over in our minds. Holding on to deep hatred towards someone gradually causes great harm to the physical body as well. Therefore, as a wise person, one should not hold hatred, because a wise person knows not to do this. Patience brings a beautiful form pleasing to the noble ones, As we discussed the other day in Entering the Middle Way, if you practice patience, you will be born physically beautiful lifetime after lifetime, and others will naturally like you. Conversely, if you often lose your temper and resent others, you will find that fewer and fewer people want to be around you. Your friends and even your relatives will gradually distance themselves from you. So, as a wise person who wishes to find happiness and ultimately attain liberation, such a person would never act resentful towards others. They would continually practice patience and maintain the view of equanimity. I notice that people vary greatly. Everyone is different. Some always maintain a very good mindset. No matter what happens, they transform whatever comes their way into favorable conditions for their practice. Others seem to speak only of others' faults as soon as they open their mouths, or whenever they talk it's about suffering. No matter what situation they encounter, they are always enveloped in an atmosphere of suffering. This is not very positive. We should try our best to look at everything without resentment, whether it's towards major countries. Sometimes I feel this way too, though not very strongly. But when it comes to those who constantly wage wars and powerful figures who regularly bully the weak, sometimes I just can't stand it. When they appear on TV, I think, oh, this person is on again. This is probably also just an unwholesome state of mind on my part, but it is very hard to stop.
然后等把那个呢，咱继续把也逐步开把改的年呐，那牛们他们这个我们不是人呐，呢，真的那个一记大的，得当结。
The steadfast abide well, keeping company with wise friends. If one can find such companions, they will conquer all afflictions. With mindfulness and a joyful heart, practice the Dharma alongside them. This mainly explains that if someone is steadfast meaning a wise person whose mind is very stable and doesn't drift with the wind, possessing a certain degree of wisdom, such people are usually good at abiding peacefully and won't be swayed by external circumstances. If one can associate with wise friends, living together, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, eating and living together, aligning many of one's actions with the wise ones, if you can find such companions, then naturally and effortlessly you will conquer all afflictions, especially hatred. Even if they are not completely uprooted, they will also gradually diminish. With mindfulness and a joyful heart, meaning you maintain proper mindfulness and awareness, this will constantly remind you to practice well. Actually, these teachers and Dharma friends are truly very important. Then your heart will also be filled with joy. So, for someone like this, who frequently walks the path with such companions, as mentioned earlier, the commentaries also had this story where in the city of Rajagriha, Jivaka had two sons. One of them joined the group of 6 monks, and ultimately his future was very bleak, very bad. The other son followed a noble being. He took refuge in a qualified spiritual friend, and in the end his practice was excellent. So later the Buddha spoke the following 2 stanzas. Therefore, who we take refuge in is indeed very important. No matter who you are, except for a very few truly steadfast individuals, it's incredibly easy to be influenced by those around you. Even for great Dharma masters, Khenpos, Geshes, and Gurus, the people around them matter a great deal. If the people around these masters have wisdom, foresight, and depth in various aspects, they will gradually have a very positive influence on that person. Even for leaders in the secular world today, it's the same. If the people under the leader's management only constantly flatter them to their face, or only offer sycophancy, and if the leader themselves lacks foresight, then ultimately all their actions will eventually be criticized and condemned by others. On the other hand, if a person's own wisdom and abilities may not be particularly remarkable, but the people around them are exceptionally good, then that person will also gradually achieve something meaningful. So no matter what kind of knowledge we are pursuing, this remains very important. So here, looking at a person's environment is crucial, especially encountering good conditions. I personally believe that for an individual, the environment they are in is very crucial. A good influencing environment, along with the people they interact with, is very significant. And additionally, one must persist in their own practice. If these 3 conditions are met, you will naturally become a better person. For instance, a very good learning atmosphere, a good environment for studying, reflecting, and meditating, coupled with good Dharma friends and a great spiritual friend, and one has stable emotions. With these three conditions, you should be able to progress. Even if in the beginning your practice and various aspects are rather lacking, with these three conditions in place, you will slowly but surely build a very bright future. That much is certain. Conversely, if one of these things is missing, it might not work. If your emotions are unstable, even with a good guru and a good practice environment, you won't necessarily achieve good results. If your place of practice is very poor in condition, perhaps you don't have a fixed place to stay. That also makes things a bit difficult, and not having a spiritual friend or guru goes without saying. So it also says here, if you are a truly wise person, you should examine your friends, your Dharma companions, and your spiritual friend. This is extremely important. If you have these conditions met, then whether it be destroying afflictions or manifesting joy in your heart, there will be no problem at all. But on the other hand, if you encounter foolish people and the people around you all have very strong desire, anger, and ignorance, then naturally you will be influenced. It says here, the steadfast abide well, keeping company with wise friends. Here, the word should be changed from can to cannot. If one cannot find such companions, like a king abandoning his kingdom, walk the path of practice alone and do not create evil karma. What this means is, even though you are a steadfast person, in the process of abiding in virtue, what you need most is a wise friend, a wise companion to walk the path with. But if you haven't found such a wise friend, if you haven't found such a companion, then you would rather be like a king abandoning his kingdom than keeping company with harmful companions. You can practice alone and not create any non-virtuous karma. This is the best choice to make. What does it mean here? If we have found excellent Dharma friends and spiritual teachers, of course we should do just as the previous stanza said. But if you haven't met such good Dharma friends, what should you do? Then you'd better live somewhere alone. You absolutely do not associate with those non-virtuous people, like eating and living with them. Otherwise, the mind for the path you originally had will be completely destroyed in an instant. Didn't we have many people leave the academy this time? With so many leaving, some are in rather pitiful situations, and they no longer can find places of practice. But some really wanted to find a place with better conditions. However, the views and behavior of these people were not very virtuous. Some of them asked me, what should we do? It seemed that if they went to that place, the people's views there were not very good, even though the living conditions were quite comfortable. Later, I suggested that the living conditions don't really matter. It is better to endure a little hardship on your own. See if you can get together with 1 or 2 Dharma friends, or even on your own, rent a place to stay temporarily and shelter yourselves from those bad influences. Perhaps later on, there will be other Dharma centers or proper places where you can go. It is true that a person might have excellent material conditions, but if the views, the practice, and the Dharma friends there are exceptionally poor, then in reality, all the good qualities you originally possessed, everything you worked so hard to accumulate, can be completely destroyed in a very short period of time. Therefore, rather than doing that, you must never allow your mind for the path to be harmed. There seems to be a story told here which says, in the past there was a king named Udāna. This king Udāna was actually an excellent practitioner. However, he had a rival king from a hostile country. This rival king was once preparing to launch an attack against him. Just as the army was about to attack, the ministers under his command began to report every single detail to the king. At one point, the enemy king's army was approaching closer and closer, step by step. They had already arrived just outside the city gates. At that time, the ministers told King Udāna, right now the enemy army had already reached such and such a place. Then King Udāna replied, it is fine, you do not need to worry, he cannot harm me. When the enemy army reached the city gates and the ministers reported to the king again, he said the exact same thing, he will not harm me. Finally, when those invaders arrived at the palace, the ministers said, look, the army has already reached your palace, what should we do? At that moment, King Sudarsana bathed and changed into fresh robes and brought forth everything he owned. He said to the enemy, "I wish to offer all of this to you as an offering. Although we were originally enemies," he said, "my palace, all my retinue, and absolutely everything I have, I give to you. I can simply go into the mountains to practice. If you wish to take this body and kill me, that is perfectly fine too. But I have only one single condition. Please, you must never harm my people. Do not harm my people. Other than that, I have no other requests. Everything can be yours." The king of that rival country asked, "Why are you doing this?" Sudarsana replied, "No matter what happens, before long I will have to part with both my palace and this physical body anyway. I can go to the mountains alone to practice virtuous dharma, but I am not willing to create negative karma, nor am I willing to see my people suffer." Upon hearing this, the rival king was deeply moved. Because he was so touched, he turned back and withdrew his entire army. Moreover, he highly praised the noble spirit of this king. It seems the Chuyaojing Udāna Varga explains this in greater detail. What is recorded in our commentary is basically the same idea. Some of the narrative details might differ slightly from version to version, but the primary principles are identical. So the core message is, throughout our future journey of practice, we would rather go out to beg alms alone and wander the world by ourselves, than ever, under any circumstances, encounter harmful companions or non-virtuous teachers. If we were to meet them, all the roots of virtue and merit that we have carefully accumulated over half a lifetime could be completely destroyed. Therefore, as individuals endowed with wisdom, we must be extremely vigilant to safeguard the mind for the path that we worked so hard to build. The Maharatnakuta Sutra also states, associating with non-virtuous teachers breeds indolence toward enlightenment. Due to these causes and conditions, one forfeits the supreme bodhicitta. We must firmly rely on virtuous spiritual friends. Otherwise, if we associate with non-virtuous teachers and become lazy in seeking awakening, then through those negative conditions, our bodhicitta will eventually be lost for sure. There will no longer be any auspicious opportunities left. Conversely, we would rather sacrifice our lives, but we must absolutely never abandon this mind for the path. One would rather swiftly surrender one's body and life than ever give rise to a malicious mind. I believe this is taught in the Mahayana Mahavaipulya Dashachakra Sutra, the 10 Wheels of Kshitigarbha, which says that we would rather, in a heartbeat, renounce our physical bodies and lifespans. All of that is acceptable, but what we must never do, especially before death, is to harbor a malicious mind and regress from our spiritual resolve. Particularly nowadays, some people develop wrong views, because in this age of the internet, if you do not have a firm and well-grounded right view, it is very easy to lose your way. Some people nowadays spread certain Brahmin teachings and various alternative views, claiming that apart from early Buddhism, nothing else constitutes the genuine sublime Dharma. Some who have not studied or reflected deeply are immediately swayed, wondering, could that really be true? Thus, I observe that in big cities today, the spiritual state of certain Buddhists is in quite a dismal condition. Even though they have studied for many years, they lack even a shred of spiritual resolve or stability in their minds. On the other hand, some indeed, through systematic learning, have developed an unshakable conviction in the Dharma. What we truly need is this kind of faith rooted in wisdom. We certainly do not need blind faith. Blind faith easily regresses, whereas faith rooted in wisdom never falters. Therefore, we must develop this wise faith. We would rather go into the mountains alone to practice and spend our later years alone in solitary retreat than ever allow ourselves to be corrupted by these negative influences. Hence, our mind for the path must be guarded at all times, protecting it just as one protects the pupil of one's own eyes. This is of paramount importance. All right, we will stop here for today.
Om Shantarangara Padma Sodargye